The LA Clippers, once the worst franchise in NBA history and the laughingstock of the NBA. Now, one of the favorites to win the 2022-23 title. In this episode, I'm going to tell you why the Clippers should be considered one of the best teams in the league going into this season, why they could very well win the title, and also why it could just be another disappointing season for Clipper Nation on today's Locked On Clippers.
Locked On Clippers, your daily Los Angeles Clippers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, sir. You are locking in with the Clippers here on Locked On Clippers. Thank you for making Locked On Clippers the first listen of your day. I am your new host, a solo host of Locked On Clippers, Darian Vaziri. You can find me on Twitter at DimeDropperPod. I've had my own podcast and YouTube channel for the last 2 years talking about my favorite team, the LA Clippers. Almost every single game that they play post-game, and also an NBA historian, big into the history of the game, researching and discussing every single season from Bill Russell's rookie season onwards to find out who the true GOATs are at each position. I'm also just an LA sports fan at large and make content on that on my channel, but primarily I am a die-hard fan of the Clippers for 18 years, born and raised in Los Angeles, and have been going to Clipper games my entire life. My first memory of the team, people always ask, why are you a Clipper fan if you live in LA? Well, my story, the 2005-06 team was the team that made me a Clipper fan for life. Sam Cassell, Elton Brand, Katino Mobley, Chris Kaman, a second-round loss in Game 7 of the Phoenix Suns that made me cry as a kid. And there were many more times where there were some brutal second-round defeats that made me cry after that as well, as many Clipper fans are aware of. But here I am, so thankful to be doing this. I want to give a shout out to Charles Mockler and William Updike, the previous hosts of Locked On Clippers, for building up this channel into what it is. But in this episode, I'm going to be talking about why the LA Clippers are the championship favorites, in my opinion. I'm going to be talking about what my preferred starting five is for the team, and of course, the potential issues that could come up that can prevent the Clippers from even getting anywhere close to the championship or the conference finals, and will make them subject of criticism, as so many people love to criticize the Clippers. The easy punching bag for jokes always. But let's get right into it, right? So obviously the Clippers are coming off a season where they didn't have their best player in Kawhi Leonard. Paul George was out the majority of the season, and despite all that, they still managed to finish above 500, win 42 games, and qualify for the 8th seed, where they were eliminated in the play-in game that I attended against the New Orleans Pelicans in very brutal fashion, in which Paul George had COVID the day of the game and didn't get to play. But all of last season, it was really all about building camaraderie and getting some continuity as a squad, bringing in some new additions in the form of Norman Powell and Robert Covington at the deadline to bolster the squad for a real title charge in the upcoming 2022-23 season. And there's no way we can talk about a title charge without talking about the man that's supposed to lead it, and that's Kawhi Leonard. So just to start about why I think the Clippers are a title contender and why I think that Clipper fans and league NBA fans should consider them the favorite, or one of the favorites, I should say. I'm not going to say the favorite, because the last time we saw Kawhi Leonard and Paul George healthy with Ty Lue at the helm as coach, the Clippers were tied 2-2 in a series against the Utah Jazz. Kawhi Leonard partially tears his ACL in Game 4, another game that I attended, and the Clippers proceed to win the next 2 games, win the series, break the second-round curse that was held over their heads for 50 years, and then lost to the Phoenix Suns, a series in which most people, including myself, think that if Kawhi Leonard had played, the Clippers would have won and then gone to the championship and played Milwaukee, and who knows what would have happened there. So the whole logic behind the whole favorite thing is the Clippers were right there the last time Kawhi Leonard was healthy. So there's no reason to believe that with another 2 years of Tyronn Lue coaching last year and, of course, this upcoming season, Reggie Jackson, Luke Kennard, Nico Batum, Marcus Morris, Ivica Zubac, Paul George. These guys have now gotten more seasons under their belt with the team. And then, as I said, the additions of Norman Powell and Robert Covington come in, give them arguably the deepest team in the NBA. So let's look at it. I guess I'm going to start out with what I think the starting five should be and then take it from there. But this team is set up for success because the modern NBA, what's working right now are big, long wing players. And that's something that the Clippers have in abundance. You look at the top two players in the team, Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, 6'7", 6'8", wings with long wingspans, can drop 30 on any given night. We know what they do on both ends of the floor. But then you bring in the role guys. Nico Batum has the ability to switch 1 to 5 in today's NBA. You saw it against Rudy Gobert in the Jazz series in 2021. You see it against guys like DeAndre Ayton. Even though Ayton did give the Clippers problems in that Western Conference Finals, Nico Batum is as good as any in the league, in my opinion, of being able to switch 1 through 5. You now bring in another guy capable of doing that can also hit the three from the outside, Robert Covington, who was absolutely fantastic for the Clips after the trade deadline in this past season. So when you really look at the squad, it is stacked. You got Marcus Morris. You got, Terrence Mann, I forgot about, and Amir Coffey. Two wings, again, who can defend multiple positions, do a variety of things. And as I said, the main thing that makes me confident in this Clipper team is the continuity. The fact that they've played with one another for multiple years now, most of the team. And of course, something that the Clippers did not have, or Clipper fans didn't have confidence in for many years, and that's the coach, Tyronn Lue, who has shown in these 2 years as Clipper coach that no matter what the situation, no matter who's playing or who's not playing, the Clippers can go out there and get a win on any given night because you know you're going to get ball movement. You're going to get an organized team that knows what coverages they're playing on defense, knows what to do, knows which guys to switch on, which guys not to switch on, and a team that's motivated and committed every single night and that enjoys each other's company. And that's one thing that sticks out, especially if you're a Clipper fan watching all the games consistently like myself, or even attends the games all the time. The camaraderie on the bench, the vibes, it's so different than what you witness as a Clipper fan if you were a fan during Lob City or even a fan during the 2020 season. Totally different. But I'm going to go in a little bit more depth about the depth coming up next, along with my starting five that I want for opening night, as well as the major addition the Clippers made in the offseason. When talking about lengthy wings, the Clippers have Amir Coffey. But before you drink your next cup of morning coffee, make sure you add a cookie dough chunk puff bar from Built Bar. They're only 160 calories and have a whopping 15 grams of protein in them. Like all Built Bars, the new cookie dough chunk puff bar is covered in 100% real chocolate, so you know it'll taste good. You are going to love the new cookie dough chunk puff. Just make sure to go to built.com and use the promo code LOCKEDON15 in all caps and get 15% off your order. That's LOCKEDON15. Okay, so let's talk about the actual depth of this Clipper roster, starting with my projected starting five. So the obvious three starters we can just pencil in are Ivica Zubac at center, Kawhi Leonard, and Paul George. Now, the next two spots are up for debate. So I'm going to start out with the forward spot, the power forward, quote unquote. You know, it's positionless basketball. That's why I use the quotes these days. But we've seen Marcus Morris start in that spot in the past. We've seen Nico Batum. My pick is Nico Batum. I know Robert Covington is also in contention for this spot this season, but I'm going to go with Nico, and here's why. Because Nico is the type of guy on the Clippers who's kind of a jack of all trades. He moves the ball well. He doesn't hold on to it too long. He's, in my opinion, arguably the best off-ball player on the entire roster when it comes to spontaneous movement. When the whole defense is locking in on guys like Kawhi and Paul George, Nico is one of the few guys in the team that's always flashing to the middle, making a cut, going for offensive rebounds. And not only that, he's also a great spot-up shooter, especially from the corners. So he gives you that off-ball element. And as I mentioned earlier, the ability to switch onto multiple guys. He's a better defender than Marcus Morris Sr. And I just think that he's the type of guy that you need on championship teams where even if their shot's not falling, they will find other ways to contribute. And that's exactly the opposite of Marcus Morris Sr., who I'm a huge fan of. And I think in his 2.5 years with the Clippers has been awesome in his role. They absolutely needed him last season to score the ball without Kawhi and Paul for so many, without Kawhi the whole season and without Paul for so much of the season. He was fantastic. But I honestly think, and I mentioned it on Locked On Fantasy, that I think Marcus Morris Sr. needs to be traded. And I know that's really harsh to hear for Clipper fans that do like him, but I really do think that his presence on the team is a little bit redundant. I think the Clippers have enough guys that can put the ball in the basket, that can create their own shot with Kawhi Leonard back. And I think that Marcus Morris Sr. is the type of guy, as I said, the opposite of Nico Batum, where if his shot's not falling, how is he really contributing to the game? He's not the best defender anymore. Laterally, he gets blown by fairly easily. He's not a non-intelligent defender, but his off-ball awareness can really be lacking sometimes. And he does not rebound enough for being the second tallest guy on the court a lot of times for the Clippers. And that can end up being problematic. So I personally think I wouldn't mind seeing Marcus Morris come off the bench, but I think he's the type of guy that will have performances, kind of like how the Clippers had to deal with Lou Williams, where he'd have in the 2020 season, where he'd have performances that are good to the point where the coach is tempted to keep him in the game, but he can also be a detriment at times. Whereas guys like Nico, they're always going to give you something. That's the defense, the extra effort plays. And Marcus Morris is kind of just a bucket getter. He spaces the floor well and everything, but I don't think we just need more one-dimensional bucket getters. And that's why I think Nico Batum should be the starting power forward alongside Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. As for the point guard spot, probably the one that is going to cause the most waves and disagreement. Everyone's been debating John Wall and Reggie Jackson. So let's get into John Wall, since he's the addition that the Clippers made, the only major one. And John Wall was brought in because the Clippers the last 2 years in the Paul George Kawhi era have lacked a true facilitator. They tried it with Rondo, but he was just past it. Now they're trying it with John Wall, who a lot of people also feel is past it. So let's get into that discussion. John Wall is a guy who was obviously one of the best point guards in the league for many years in Washington, was so electric off the bounce, got to the paint at will, and was one of the most athletic point guards I've ever seen. Now, he's obviously had a plethora of major injuries since then. We don't know how much burst he truly still has, how much elevation he has at the rim. He did play for Houston in 2020, 2021 before they shut him down. And then, of course, last season, they didn't play him at all because they didn't want him to get injured, and they knew that he wasn't part of their long-term plans. So he hasn't played basketball in the NBA for over a year. And most times that can be a little bit iffy, but he wasn't injured, so it is a little bit different. He's got to be well rested, and everything about the way John Wall's been talking in interviews and the way the team has been talking about him. And by the way, I had a sit down with Jerry West that I'm going to post on my YouTube channel, where he talked about how excited he is about having John Wall and the intention of bringing him in. And he said that the intention was to get a guy to get downhill, which is what the Clippers have lacked, get 2 feet in the paint and drive and kick and put pressure on the defense. Because as I've said multiple times on other podcasts, Kawhi Leonard, as great as he is, his strength right now at this stage of his career is more mid-range assassin, post-game. Yes, he can still get to the basket, but he's not getting by guys at will the same way a guy like a John Wall used to, or a guy like LeBron James used to. You know what I'm saying? Paul George, I'd say, does a better job of getting to the basket. The only thing about Paul George is, as Clipper fans know very well, he gets, I think, the worst whistle in the entire NBA. But besides our main guys, or the Clippers' main guys, Kawhi and Paul George, Reggie Jackson, Norman Powell are probably the main guys alongside Terrence Mann that can get downhill. But the John Wall that I remember can do that better than any of those guys I just named. So we're going to see how he is. If John Wall is even close to that Washington version, then the Clippers seriously added someone that's going to take them to the next level. Because if he can get to the paint and just create more open shots for the shooters that the Clippers have assembled, the Robert Covington, the Nico Batums, Terrence Mann, obviously even Kawhi and Paul, making their job easier. And that's something that I know they intended for as well, trying to make the stars' job easier. But it really all comes down to what advantages John Wall can create with his scoring gravity or attention. Because in today's NBA, it's not as simple as where back in the day you had a traditional point guard feeding guys in their spots. Now it's more pick and roll based. How can you create an advantage in the pick and roll that causes the defense to have to react so you can make a read? And John Wall getting downhill is going to be what the Clippers need to get all these other guys open shots. But I'm going to go with my pick, Reggie Jackson, to start, only because, as I mentioned before, that continuity that he has already having played with with Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. In 2021, we saw what Clipper fans coined catch and shoot Reggie play alongside those two and shoot unbelievable percentages from deep, buying into more of a catch and shoot role. Because Reggie Jackson, the one negative of him is that he can bite off more than he can chew sometimes and play hero ball. But we needed him to, or the Clippers needed him to play hero ball in 2022. In 2021, he was a lot more catch and shoot, and Kawhi and Paul were creating so many good shots for him. And I would love to see that Reggie Jackson return and in a very prominent role this season. So that's why my personal pick is Reggie Jackson starting, because I want to see John Wall create with the second unit and see how he does. But at the same time, I don't think it's a bad idea to have John Wall starting alongside Kawhi and Paul either. I just think that Kawhi Leonard and Paul George are the ones that I want with the ball in their hands the most. And I think John Wall can take the ball away from them because his strength comes from on the ball, whereas Reggie Jackson is probably a better threat off the ball. And that's kind of where my mind's at. Reggie Jackson being the better threat off the ball is why I want him to start alongside Kawhi and Paul, because I want the ball in their hands ultimately. But I trust that Tyronn Lue will make the right decision regardless. And that's one thing, as I mentioned earlier, that Clipper fans can be so comfortable with, is that their coach is going to make the right decision for the team and adjust if things go wrong. It's all about adjustments in this league, but it's also about health. And coming up, I'm going to talk about the potential concerns as to why the season just might not be what Clipper fans are hoping for. So we talked about the switchability on defense that the Clippers have. You're going to see a lot of small ball lineups this season with the Clippers being able to switch 1 through 5. I would, consider putting lineups like Terrence Mann, Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, Nico Batum, and Robert Covington all out there at once, which is just sounds like a nightmare for other teams. Every single pick and roll is going to get blown up, and all those guys can do a good job staying in front of their man. The only thing with those kind of lineups is you got to gang rebound. That's the main thing. And speaking on the subject of rebounding, that leads us to a potential concern for the Clipper roster right now. So I did talk about how I kind of want to see Marcus Morris Sr. get traded. You might be asking, who do you bring in? I don't even think the Clippers need anyone else. I think, honestly, that could be addition by subtraction, just because it'll make the coaching staff's job easier and it'll be less players' egos to manage in terms of playing time and things like that. Because I do want to see Luke Kennard still playing a good amount. That's another thing with John Wall coming in and obviously having Norman Powell, who's, as I mentioned earlier, has not played with Kawhi and Paul George altogether. We're going to have to see that Norman Powell and John Wall are going to play. So Luke Kennard may be the casualty that loses a lot of minutes. And now everyone's going to lose minutes with Kawhi coming back and the addition of John Wall. But Luke Kennard could be the one that really takes the biggest hit. And this is a guy who led the league in three-point percentage last season, was such an important part of so many Clipper comebacks, has range like no other, can shoot, catching the ball going both ways, and even has more off the dribble than people realize, especially in that mid-range going to his right. And even has shown chops playmaking in pick and roll recently as well. I don't want to see Luke Kennard get thrown in the bench and not get many minutes, because I think you need shooters, and you can't get enough of guys who can shoot the lights out around star players. And we have 2 star players in Paul and Kawhi that are going to create a lot of open shots for guys, and you need guys to knock down those shots. And Luke Kennard, not only is he knocked down, but he can get streaky too. And when it gets streaky, it can be lights out. He's one of the best shooters, catch and shoot players I've ever seen. That's not an exaggeration. Luke Kennard, I don't want to see him just fall to the wayside and not play. But with the depth the Clippers have, these are things that may just have to happen. However, there's going to be load management this season. There are going to be injuries. It's just inevitable. So guys are going to have to play, and having the depth the Clippers have is why I think that they are going to win 60 games this season. But here are the concerns that could prevent that. So obviously the major one, health. Kawhi Leonard and Paul George starts from the top. I always say it starts from the top. And that's something you're going to notice with me hosting this podcast is I always look at the star performances first because they're the big ones making the big bucks. They're the ones that as fans we rely on. And when the games are in question, they're the ones that make the winning plays or are supposed to make the winning plays. Paul George and Kawhi Leonard have not proven to be reliable in terms of staying on the court since they came to the Clippers. Kawhi Leonard, obviously, healthy the first year, fairly healthy the second year, obviously doing load management both years, even though he toned it down the second year. And then last year, 2021-22, out the whole season. A big concern, guys, we still haven't heard Kawhi Leonard has been cleared to play 5-on-5 yet. And that's a little bit concerning. Because if he's not ready for opening night, that sets all the plans the Clippers had back a little bit. And we're not hearing it. So that makes me think, has there been a setback? Because as a fan, I'd be really disappointed if the Clippers don't have him for opening night. You know, it's time. It's so important to, in a championship quest, to get things going the right way, have the starting lineup that you want to have starting the season ready to go. And Kawhi Leonard just being ready to go after a whole year out would be huge. You know, he needs those first couple of games to get warm, and it would be great if those first couple of games where he's getting warm are the same games where everybody else in the league is also getting warm. As far as Paul George, I think he's going to be great. I think he's going to be fine. It's just a matter of him staying out of being injured, staying healthy. And if Kawhi Leonard and Paul George can each play 55 plus games, I want to say 60 plus games. If you're thinking 70 plus, I think you're pushing it. But if they can play 55 to 70 games, the two of them, I think the Clippers have an amazing shot to get 60 wins for the first time in franchise history. For those that don't know, the most wins in franchise history was the 2013-14 season where they won 57 games, finished with the 3 seed. But I think not only is this a better Clipper team than that 2014 team, the depth when one person is missing a game or a star player is missing a game like a Kawhi or Paul is so much stronger. And not only are the Clippers a better coach team, when one guy goes down or like a Kawhi or Paul has gone down in the past, they have shown that next man up mentality like no other team. Anybody can step up on a given night. You had Robert Covington scoring 40 plus points in a game last season against the Milwaukee Bucks when Paul George and Kawhi didn't play. And that's another thing. It's not just if Kawhi doesn't play or if Paul doesn't play. When both of them have sat out, we played the majority of last season and played at a 500 level. So it's really just the experience with having played without the main men that makes me believe that just Paul George missing a game for load management or something and expect him to load manage back-to-backs. I would be shocked if he doesn't. Kawhi, almost a guarantee. I'd say 99.9%. But even without one of them on a given night, or even both of them on a given night, the Clippers still may have the better roster, and that's how deep this team is. You've got guys like Amir Coffey and Brandon Boston, who I don't even think are going to get into the regular rotation when guys are healthy. So that brings us, so yes, health is the major concern. Barring injury, everyone's saying this Clipper team has as good of a chance as good a chance as any to win the whole thing. As far as other concerns, I'd say losing Isaiah Hartenstein, who was fantastic for the Clips last year, is going to be tough. Do the Clippers go out and get a backup center, or do they ride with Moses Brown or Diabate? So we'll see. Those are young guys, not experienced. The thing is, I don't think the Clippers are going to be using a backup center that much, especially in the playoffs. As I said, a lot more small ball and just using Zoo as the only traditional center. But it is good to have some extra assurance in the regular season, because what if Zoo gets injured, or what if Zoo gets load managed 1 or 2 games? I mean, Zoo is one of those guys that's probably the most reliable on the team in terms of playing every game, but you just never know. Foul trouble as well, various situations. You want to have some assurance and have 2 7-footers that you can trust on the roster. And then my last concern, Kawhi Leonard, mainly. Is he going to be the same Kawhi Leonard? This is not a simple injury, a small injury. It's a major injury. They said it was a partial ACL tear. It clearly is more like a full tear. It's been a whole season plus. The title hopes of the Clippers really rest on this guy. He's the guy that's been there, done that with Toronto. He's won 2 championships. On his day when he's healthy, he's arguably the best player in the NBA. I mean, his mid-range, 3-level scoring ability, plus his defense when he's locked in, is second to none. And he's got this unshakable confidence about him. And when he gets in that zone, like you saw in Game 6 against the Dallas Mavericks in the playoffs when he was last healthy. And by the way, that was just last year, 2021. A lot of people like to act like Kawhi Leonard hasn't played in 5 years. It's been 1 season. And with the modern surgeries and how far we've come technologically, there's a really strong chance that Kawhi Leonard still looks like the Kawhi Leonard that we know. So that gives me the optimism to say that this Clipper team is going to win the 2022-23 title, make history, and I'm going to be the host of Locked On Clippers, overseeing it all, guiding you guys, guiding you on this journey, listening to me every single morning, 5 days a week during the season. I cannot wait. So let me ask you, is it championship or bust? Make sure you comment on the YouTube channel. We are now posting on YouTube every single episode. So make sure you interact in the comment section. Give me feedback. What do you want me to improve on? I'm always looking for constructive criticism. As I said, it's just my first episode. So I want to make sure that you guys, whether you're a Clipper fan or just an NBA fan, are getting exactly what you want and are getting the best analysis you can get, as unbiased as I can be about it, even though I'm such a big fan. But I try to be objective. Again, you can find me at Dime Dropper Pod on Twitter and Instagram. Thank you so much for listening. Next time, I'm going to go in even more depth about each one of the players and what I want our bench rotation to be when healthy. Thanks, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.